I call this meeting to order. This is a regular meeting of the Northfield Public School Board. Today is Monday, November 14th, 2022, and the time is 6:02. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded. The recording of this meeting will be posted on the district website as soon as possible. Welcome to our members of the community here to observe the important work being done on behalf of all school district stakeholders. Dr. Hillman, we have some items in the table file.
Yes, board members, we have several items in the table file this evening, so I want to go through them to call them to your attention. The first of which is we have several additions to the consent agenda, including a gift agreement, some overnight field trips, a number of different personnel appointments. In addition, under items for individual action, we have updates to several of the items. There is an updated recommended motion and updated narrative in the table file for the additional English learner support. You'll notice that there's a little bit of additional FTE through an overload that was included in the table file. I will point out that all of it is coming from our district's contingency budget. We also have several items related to the canvassing of the election. So we have the recommended resolutions as well as the abstract that we obtained from Rice County. And so we have the regular resolutions that go along with canvassing the results of both the general election for board members and for the special election related to the capital projects levy questions. Finally, we also have an additional piece with the World's Best Workforce annual report. So just an updated part there. Those are the items that are in the table file, just a few more than usual. So I wanted to call them to your attention.
Okay, thank you. If there are no objections, we will add these items to the agenda as we move forward. Okay. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Okay, moved by Jeff, second by Amy. Thank you. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Is there any public comment, Anita? Okay, then we will move on to the next item, which is announcements and recognitions.
And I have no announcements nor recognitions this evening.
Very good. Board members, do you have any announcements? Okay, Julie.
So I just wanted to acknowledge as a board how thrilled we were that Dr. Hillman was named the 2023 Minnesota Superintendent of the Year. And for those of us who work with him, it was not a matter of if, but when he would be recognized in this way for his outstanding work. And tonight, I just want to acknowledge and thank the community who have publicly shared their excitement for Dr. Hillman. Our district youth council even gave him a cupcake party. So
That's part of the whole deal.
It was really gratifying for the board to have the community broadly express their support for Dr. Hillman. And again, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Anyone else? Amy.
I just want to mention I had the great pleasure of attending the Edward Tulane play put on by the high school. And, you know, they're getting back in the swing of things after not being able to be as active in the last couple of years. And it was really fun to see all the high school students back up on stage and doing their thing.
Excellent. Very nice. Okay, we will move on to items for discussion and reports. And first, we have a summary of the public hearing regarding the 2022-2023 World's Best Workforce Plan and any community feedback that came with that. Welcome, Director of Instructional Services, Hope Langston.
So while Hope's coming, I'll just mention for people watching, we did have the World's Best Workforce public hearing prior to this meeting that was live streamed and recorded. So people who want to watch that presentation can do so. And Hope is going to just be able to provide a very brief summary that we talked about, and then board members have the chance for questions.
A brief summary. So we know we have some work in front of us, right? And I think we have a staff that's committed to making whatever instructional changes they need to, and working hard through the PLC process to identify some goals that will push student achievement forward. And so while we did not meet our benchmarks this year, we did see some glimmers, like in kindergarten and in some of our third grade demographic groups that again highlight for us that the power of our instruction and of what we do every day in making an impact on those student outcomes. So we believe we have some good resources in place to make that happen.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Any questions or comments on the presentation, Julie?
Thank you, Hope. So I have a couple questions. One area that was really interesting that you highlighted was AVID and that program. And I just recall how excited Principal Delano was this summer when he presented, or this fall when he presented his site improvement plan. So it's really interesting to see how the middle school has really embraced that program and the good work that it will do. I had two questions. So we had talked about what I have always known as new to country, and now we're talking at that particular group of students as newly enrolled. And I was wondering if they have their own cell for reporting, or where they are reported out, if at all, separately.
So that's a great question. And the terminology has changed even in my tenure in this position. And so what used to be called new to country, NTC, because we like acronyms, referred to students who had been in the country less than a year. That terminology change, I actually was surprised because I went to look it up and I was like, really? We started calling them RAILs, recently arrived English learners, back in 2016. And so that terminology change came with a change in accountability, where we used to not have new to country students take the MCA the first year that they were in the country. We are now required to have them take the MCA. And while they don't count in our accountability measure that first year, what they're doing is really establishing a baseline for growth. So the legislative change was that they have to take all of the MCA tests. So the term changed. I know that the state is going to be considering actually a change to the English learner terminology as well in this upcoming school year. So yeah, it was really just simple terminology change and then the accountability piece.
Okay, thank you. My second question is, it was either the last year's World's Best Workforce or the previous year. Don't have it in my notes, other than you talking about course mapping at the high school, and if they are still doing that and how that is moving the needle at all on the graduation rate for some of the demographics.
So I think that was their primary focus of PLC work last year. Was the course mapping. And I think that there were some teams that made some fantastic progress on that. I think it's now been integrated into the PLC teams that have been established at the high school this year. There are 26 teams at the high school, and they're in course alike structures. And so I think that while teams established that last year, they are now further refining that and really thinking about kids' actual success in each and every class at the high school and what it is. So I'm really, really excited to see the PLC progress this year, because the goals that we have seen, and I've read them all, are pretty impressive on what teams are committed to doing this year. So I think course mapping, while not identified by itself this year, is integrated into that PLC work.
Okay, great. And then my last question is, are we doing flexible learning groups at the elementary school?
We are doing, some grade levels are doing them. We did not require them this year. We are because of class sizes. So we allowed teams to sort of look at their particular student population. And what we're seeing are some really interesting, not formal flex groups in some grade levels, but some really interesting scheduling things that are happening. We also have some teams that are doing some departmentalizing in the upper elementary. And so I actually am glad that because we actually toyed around with that, like we're going to have everybody flex group. But when we looked at the class sizes and we looked at some of the needs, we thought, let's see what these teams come up with based on their knowledge, their in-depth knowledge of their kids. And we are seeing some really interesting things that teams are doing to improve student outcomes. So I'm excited to see that organically grown response to students who need additional support and students who need extension.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. Just wondering on attendance, you mentioned 75%, showing up and then 60 and 62. I mean, how does that equate to real days? And even that 75, I mean, seems real low to me. I don't know what.
So we have to remember, we're talking about 75% of those kids were consistently attending. So we have 173 school days. So consistently attending means you miss no more than 17 over the course of the school year, which we all know can add up pretty quickly if you go to college visits or whatever, and you're out with a flu for a week. But it's that metric is the percentage of kids who are consistently attending, not actual attendance rate.
Amy.
Thank you, Hope, for your presentation. I have several questions. So I think you touched on this in your presentation, but I wonder if you could tell me again. So during the pandemic, we had difficulty counting the FRLP,
Yes.
FRPL,
FRP.
those people,
Yes.
those students. And so if those counts were incomplete, how did it affect our numbers for those years?
So that's a really interesting question, Amy, because we know that when meals were provided, our families did not fill out the FRP form at the same rate as in prior years. So we had a lower percentage of students coded as FRP. So our cell size was smaller, which again leads to, it's kind of interesting when you think about it in third grade, because that they saw an uptick, but it was actually like kids that were, whose families did fill out the form that year. And you saw a cell size that could have been impacted either way, right? But so it essentially reduced our cell size. What we are seeing this year, because of this direct certification process through Medicare, our numbers are actually back up to 30% as a district. I don't know what the official October 1 count will be. I have not seen that yet, but I see it on a daily basis, and our numbers are quite high again, right? Similar to actually in some places like the high school, higher than we've seen pre-pandemic. So I do think we did see an impact in terms of smaller cell size in 21 and 22 for the MCAs. I still think we can celebrate that win in third grade, but know that those numbers are going to be higher this year.
So that begs the question, what was the FRP percentage during the pandemic, which was obviously incomplete?
It was lower. I don't have the number. As a district, we were, I want to say we were 20%.
About a third.
Yeah.
Then I want to ask about the ACT scores with the students.
Mm-hmm.
When do they actually take the ACT scores? What grades?
So we, in Northfield, we give something called the pre-ACT to our sophomores. And that is what used to be the first time our kids would take a time test, right? So we knew that we had to have something in place so that they weren't walking into their first time test their junior year. So 10th grade fall, they take the pre-ACT. Our sophomores have already taken it this year. In the spring of junior year, you select one of the state testing days. For us this year, it happens to be March 7th. That is the junior testing day when all juniors can take the ACT during the school day. We pay for all students to take it. The state reimburses us for our free and reduced lunch students who take it. So we typically, they'll offer 2 days in the spring. We typically never can. We always have one choice because the other either falls during our spring break or right after it, or, it just, so it usually is in late February, early March. 2023 date is March 7th. And then students can choose to take other ACT tests on their own through national testing days. So the state testing day, we offer it during the school day. National testing days are on Saturday, and students would sign up for those on their own.
A couple of, so last year's free and reduced price meal percentage was 21.1%. That's from the Minnesota State Report Card. And I want to clarify, when we talked about direct certification, I used the incorrect term. I used the term Medicare when I meant Medicaid. So that is how we are part of a group that can be, our students can be directly certified. If they qualify for Medicaid, they are automatically or directly certified for free and reduced price lunch. So for people who are wondering, it was Medicaid, not Medicare, just to be very clear.
Instead of doing the free and reduced lunch
Right, so they,
application.
so instead of having to complete the application, they're directly certified because they have qualified at the state level for Medicaid.
Are we still requiring the application?
We are still using the application. We're really emphasizing that people complete it, but the direct certification obviously makes a huge difference. I don't think anyone, I don't think very few people could believe that during the pandemic, we had this sudden drop in the number of people who qualified for free or reduced price lunch. It happened to be that the paperwork just wasn't completed. And that's where this Medicaid certification or direct certification is one of the ways that they're looking at trying to avoid that gap in the paperwork, right? Because there are services and things for students who qualify for free or reduced lunch that we think that they should have access to. And if they weren't able, if there was a barrier for people to complete the form, et cetera, this Medicaid direct certification, of which I'm pretty sure Minnesota is a pilot of that this year. It's fairly new. So this is a good piece for our students to be able to have that direct certification option.
And for instance, at the high school where we very typically would see FRP rates in the low 20s. I mean, since I've been here, either upper teens, low 20s. Last time I checked, the high school's FRP rate this year was 30%. And that's directly because of removing this barrier of the application process.
Thank you. Hope. Amy, do you have another question or you?
I think I'm good. Thank you.
Anyone else? Corey?
Hi, Hope. Thanks for the report. Follow up on the ACT score measurements here. So is every junior required to take the test in the spring?
So what we do, and we've been doing this for we actually tested that in 2020, right before the school shutdown. We began offering a choice about 4 years ago. And that is because we could very clearly see that the ACT just was not the appropriate test for every single junior. So they're in the process right now of beginning that choice selection process. And the high school does a fantastic job. The school counselors, every family gets a postcard that lays out the 3 tests they can take: Acuplacer if you want to go to community college, ACT, or the ASVAB if you want to join the military. And then they give a window by which you can choose which test you want to take. The default test is the ACT. So if we don't hear from you, your student's going to be signed up for the ACT, but we do give families and students a choice between those 3 tests. And we think that that's been a good switch for us, just to make sure that, you know, everybody's doing what they need to do for their own post-secondary choice.
So as we look at the year-to-year decline, except for Northfield this past year for
Mhm.
ACT scores, do we have a sense of what the trend is with the number of students nationwide who are taking this test? Because my understanding is fewer colleges and universities are requiring an ACT score. And I'm wondering if that's impacting which students are taking the test. So if you have a high GPA and a nice resume of extracurricular activities, maybe you're not taking it because you can get into a school without it. So then the students who traditionally maybe not do as well on those tests bring the average down. Do we have any sense on if that's an impact here?
I'm not going to profess to say that I know what all is going into ACT's whole population, but I will say, you know, some interesting things have happened since schools decided, you know, that you saw a growing trend of schools not accepting ACT. We now see schools starting to say, we are going to require the ACT because it actually made our achievement gap worse in terms of enrollment. Where you also saw an impact with kids, and this was an unintended consequence, is that scholarships and other programming remained reliant on ACT scores. So if you didn't have an ACT score, all of a sudden you were maybe not eligible for some funding that you could have gotten. So I don't have those numbers, but I would make a educated guess that their number of kids taking the test has dropped. We have been very stable with that here in Northfield.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another question, Julie?
I just had one more question. You talked about the letters training and the stipend that the district is providing the teachers and staff that are doing that training, but we are also receiving significant funding from the state for that program as well, correct?
So the state is paying for the materials, right? And the way that the state rolled it out is that it was between the teacher and the state. There was no district involvement in the sign up. We used some ESSER funding because we knew if we really wanted teachers to invest in this very intensive coursework, to ask them to do that on their own time while they're teaching was a big ask. And so we looked at ESSER funding available. Thank you, Val, for thinking creatively about this. But we're committed to this, right? We know that this is what's going to make a difference in our literacy instruction. So I think it's a powerful statement that the district is committed to supporting teachers' work on this. But the MDE legislative funding, not MDEs, but the legislature, is really about the materials and then those live training sessions that teachers have to attend for each unit.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Want to
Yes.
make a comment?
I do. So I want to thank Hope for delivering the data. As you know, I mean, this is a required report, but as you know, we do not shy away from providing the data, whether it's something that we celebrate or something that we mourn. And I think we mourn some of the results that we had to present to you tonight. They were largely predictable, right? We've gone through one of the most historic disruptions in American society in a century. So it isn't a shock that our students struggled to make benchmarks, because there was a lot of struggle throughout society in a number of other areas. But I do want to point you back to look at the data leading in to the pandemic. Because if you look at the data leading into the pandemic, all of our indicators, what I consider to be the domino indicators, the indicator that tells us greater things are coming, were on the market increase. So ready for kindergarten numbers going into the pandemic were increasing. We had 3 successive years of really, I would say, considerable growth in terms of the proficiency of students at grade 3 reading. Those 2 specific items, there is no reason to believe that now we are getting back to somewhat regular. I understand that there's a lot of pieces that are laying over from the pandemic that will continue to impact us. But now that we are getting back to regular, if you hear the things that Hope shared, leaning completely and not just partially, completely leaning into the science of reading, right? This research, this latest brain research about how to unlock the skill of reading in students. I would put the percentage of our teachers who are taking this training up against anybody in the state. And I'd bet you a week's worth of Diet Coke, which is fairly significant for me, that we rank close to the top. We know what to do, right? We are executing those plans. And if the past performance leading into the pandemic predicts future success, which I believe, as we come out of this, I do believe that we're going to have an acceleration. It may not be just specifically in the next year, but we have great confidence about our ability to rebound from this to be even better than we were pre-pandemic over the next couple of years. We still need patience. We still need perseverance. But we have a number of other very specific things. Middle school science has just gone through a substantial review and adoption of a new curriculum. There's a number of other things that we believe are going to really gain some steam as we rebound from the pandemic. So while we are disappointed to share with you tonight that we didn't make any of our goals, we don't cry about it. We don't whine about it, right? We just say, what's next? We lean into it and we try to figure out what is the next thing that we're going to do to make a difference. So we just have to share that. I mean, our performance going into the pandemic, we think we're going to pick up where that left off afterwards.
And I just, again, want to give a shout out to the teachers who are in the letters training. Because when you think about it, we have districts around us who had 1, maybe 2 teachers sign up. Our teachers to sign up in those numbers just speaks to their commitment to addressing student literacy, because it's a significant group of people in our district who are taking the training, and they didn't have to, right? And so it really does speak to their commitment and their drive to improve the literacy outcomes for our kids.
And I hope that training is offered just for K through 3, right?
Actually, K-5.
Oh, through 5.
Well,
okay.
and pre-K-5, actually, because we have pre-K teachers in it.
Okay.
It started out as K3 and then they broadened it, and I'm hopeful because we have teachers waiting in the pipeline to take this training. We are fortunate. We did have one of the instructional coaches, Alicia Clary. She is a trained facilitator, so now she can train people in Northfield. And then we have Carlene Sherman, who went through the Regional Centers for Excellence, and she will be an MDE certified trainer. So we have a special education and general education trainers to accelerate the number of people who can get through this training as well. So.
How interested were our K-3 teachers in the district? Are most of them taking it? I mean, I know everybody has different availability and reasons for not taking it right away.
Yeah, and I think like like with any intensive program, we had some people sign up that just because of different personal commitments could not complete that. But I don't have the numbers right in front of me. But again, I think while it's not every K-3 teachers taking it, we have representation from every building, every grade level. So,
Good. Thank you so much for your presentation.
all right, thank you.
Board members. We are going to move on now. Okay, Dr. Hillman will now present on the Northfield High School facility.
Yes, so here we go. We are going to do what we can tonight to start moving toward a preferred solution for the board to move ahead with the Northfield High School facility. What I will tell you is I do not expect that we will have obviously an answer this evening, but what I am asking board members to do is after I share a brief summary of the survey results, some example ballot questions, some potential timing, I am asking that you start to give me, if you were to have to make a call tonight, where do you lean in terms of the different options that we have ahead of us? And I want to be very clear that I have provided 4 example ballot questions. There are probably 5 or 6 times that many options, but we are now at a point where we've spent a lot of time. We went back and got you a very sophisticated data set, a professional data set that is scientifically valid and reliable in terms of what we think the community would support, both from the perspective of different pathways or different options for people to think about within a particular approach, and what they are willing to potentially pay for that. So we have given you, I think, what I would consider to be one of the ultimate data sets for a board to use to inform the pathway forward. And then we're going to share a little bit about some of the different options that are available for timing. And what I'm hoping is that I can ask each board member to weigh in on this after I've presented, because my hope is that will give us the data that we need so that I am able to consult with our team, with Val and Cole Nelson and the rest of our team, and start narrowing and bringing forward something to you that this board could have consensus around adopting moving forward. Now, to be clear, you'll hear from my timing. We've got quite a bit of time in terms of months before we would get to the specific ballot language, but there is a tremendous amount of runway that is needed for a bond project like this. So I'm going to just share a few items overview. And then what I'm hoping is that I'm asking board members to weigh in, where do you lean right now? What more information do you need from me, both on what potential ballot question might you be interested in, and also what you would think for the timeline. So before I get started, does that make sense to folks? One of my jobs is to help start to get you to narrow you toward consensus on these options. We have to take action, right? So now is the time to start getting to the point where we know what the goal is, and then we will execute the plan. I can assure you of that. And then we would await the voters' results in peace. So the first part is just reminding people, we've been talking about this for some time. I'm going to go back to 2017. So in 2017, we brought forward a question to the voters asking for a bond referendum that would have given more than $100 million, that would have provided both a brand new high school and a set of elementary school projects. That particular ballot question was soundly defeated that evening. We did pass an operating levy that evening, but we did not pass that bond question. We did a debrief afterwards. Like we always do, we looked at the data. We determined what that told us. We came forward to the voters in 2018 with a bond referendum specific to the elementary schools, the construction of the new Greenvale Park, the renovation and addition at other buildings as well. That passed handily. Over 60% of people agreed with that particular question. So we have continued to know that there were needs at Northfield High School. We have not let the building go. We have continued to do updates and things like doing some simple things like removing lockers and replacing them with countertops or benches. We've done things like paint the building, paint the doors. We've done things like increase security by creating a secure front entry, redoing the high school office, some of those kinds of pieces, because why would voters trust us with anything more if we don't take care of what we have? So while we haven't invested a tremendous amount into the facility, we certainly have kept it up to make sure that we are leveraging the investment that the community has made. Last winter, we did convene a task force. Around 30 members of the community, staff, students, people with children in the district, people without children in the district came together to really try to wrestle with this question. They gave you a set of considerations, recommendations, if you will, things that they were interested in the board considering as we moved forward. We have had several work sessions. We've had several other discussions, and we commissioned a study from Morris Leatherman. The board heard Dr. Don Lifto provide those results of the stratified randomized sample survey of 400 district voters. I want to remind you that the plus or minus, the margin of error on that was 4.8%. Very good for a survey of this size. What my summary is, as you heard and discussed at the last meeting, is that it does appear that the survey results demonstrated solid support for not only the school district. I think there was overall really quality support for the school district, 83% of respondents giving the district an A or B letter grade, only 3% giving a D or F. Over 2/3 gave high quality grades to the financial management of the district. So we know that the survey shows we have a community that supports us. We also know that they provided solid support for plans that would be remodeling Northfield High School and adding an athletic field house. We know that there was solid support outside of the margin of error for those items. There was also conceptual support for something like adding a multi-story academic addition to the Northfield High School. But we have to be straightforward too, that the second part of this, the tax tolerance component of it, or the tax aversion section, gets to the point where that could rule out that option, right? We were talking about an $80 million bond referendum needed for pathway 2. And what we know is that from the data that the $135 in tax increase on a $300,000 house is what appears to be the sweet spot. It's not that that is a completely locked in number, but we know that that's outside the margin of error. It's not that we couldn't get a little bit more than that. But what the survey says is that is a number that appears solid in terms of the support of the community. So we work with Ehlers Incorporated, our financial consultants. They do back mapping of what size of a bond could we get at a $135 increase for a $300,000 home. They do that work. And what we have heard from Jeff Seeley and Shelby McQuay and the team at Ehlers is that on a 20-year bond, if we financed it over 20 years, that would mean that there'd be around $65 million worth of bonding authority that we'd be able to get. If we looked at financing it over 25 years, that number would rise to around 77 million approximately. So that is really, in terms of what the data tells us, what the tax tolerance or beyond that would be tax aversion to it. So that's an important component for us to think about. We have solid support for people knowing that there needs to be substantial remodeling and or additions to the high school. People get that. That's very clear. Then when we put that up against the dollars that it would take to be able to do those things, they give us a fairly good sweet spot in terms of what we have confidence that voters would approve. So that is right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm just reporting to you what my analysis of the data is. And I think Dr. Lifto, I think I'm reiterating what Dr. Lifto shared with you at the last board meeting. Now, I do think it's important to give you some potential ways that you could use that data. I want to be extremely clear that these are not Matt's preferred pathways. These are not my preferred scenarios. They are 4 ways that you could look at it. I intentionally selected different ballot approaches so that you would get a sense of what you potentially could select. So while I will tell you, I will not recommend this, I need to show you scenario 1, which talks about a single ballot question that would ask for all of the dollars in one ballot question. So in that case, what you could look at doing is including all of pathway one at $60 million and an additional $17 million for the field house. Now, that does not include the artificial turf on Memorial Field. Remember that the field house part was estimated around $20 million, but that also included the turf on Memorial Field. If we have a top end of $77 million that we would be looking at, I've simply adjusted it a bit to be able to come in within that area, though I think that we're fairly close in terms of when we remove that turf. The turf is not $3 million, but it certainly is $2 million. Another ballot question scenario would be 2 ballot questions, which the first of which would be the academic improvements and the other structural facility improvements to the high school itself, around $60 million. And the second question, including that $17 million for a field house. So giving voters a question 1 and a question 2, clearly separating out the current high school facility improvements from the potential athletic improvements. And I want to point out too, when we talk about the field house, I understand that it may be for people who don't know all of what goes on in terms of athletics and that kind of programming. Remember that that field house will be used every day as a Phi Ed classroom. You will for certainly use at least 2 courts, 2 full-size basketball courts as Phi Ed teaching stations. And there is also the possibility of doing some other partner work with some other organizations in the community for shared use of that field house. So I want to point out, it isn't just about athletic practices. It is a teaching station because we do have a significant lack of gym space for teaching Phi Ed. And for the folks who are on the task force, we heard that loud and clear, didn't we? That was some of the things that we heard very clearly, that Phi Ed folks really believe that we need to have a substantial improvement in their area, their teaching area. Really, the gym is their classroom. A scenario 3, you could go to 3 ballot questions. The first of which could be pathway 1, the second of which could be the field house, and the third of which in this example could be artificial turf for Memorial Field and or other fields adjacent to Memorial Field, to be able to create a scenario where those fields could be utilized greater than just the traditional year that we're able to. Because as you know, once the snow starts flying and early in the spring when things are wet, we can't always use all of those athletic fields out there. Some turf would create greater accessibility for it and allow even greater access for the community. Now, I did include a 4th scenario because you'll notice that we had not talked ice arena yet as part of this process. And so another scenario could be a variety of different ways that you look at putting these things together. But a scenario 4 in this case could also be 3 ballot questions, one of which would be the academic or the improvements to the academic facility. The second being a field house component, and the third question including up to $20 million for the construction of an ice arena. Now, I gave you 4 potential scenarios. You can mix and match all that you want, right? You could potentially have a quick Q1 that was solely, again, about the academic facility and improving HVAC and windows and the day-to-day climate within the existing high school facility. The second question could be a combination of a field house and an ice arena. I mean, there's a number of different things that you can do. I do need to point out that the survey data was right around 50% of people who supported the construction of an ice arena. Now, I understand there's a lot of more complicating components to that, but it is something that with the margin of error, right? It isn't something that's outside the margin of error. And what I also want to be clear about with the board is that I have continued to work with the city and with other local business leaders to continue to pursue a public-private partnership that could potentially solve the issue of ice outside of a school district bond issue. But we have talked about it. We know that we have a vested interest in making sure that ice remains in Northfield. I don't need to go down the path of telling you the potential revenue loss that we would have if students who play hockey leave because we don't have access to ice in the community. Not hearing that that's going to happen next year or even the year after, but it's something that we do need to plan for. So while I do understand that it is not something regular that a school district runs and operates an ice arena, that is not the usual piece in Minnesota. It is something we do want to have a seat at the table about because it does have a substantial impact on our potential revenue should we be without ice, we know that we would lose a significant number of students right out of the gate and potentially even more as we go down the line. So I want to again share, I tried to give you 4 scenarios that could give you a feel for what kind of ballot questions you could ask. I want to be very clear that they are not Matt's recommended options, but they are different ways for you to think about how you might construct the ballot. Now, the next item is the timeline that I need to share. State law does allow for bond elections to be held on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in February, April, May, August, and November. Now, we had early on talked about a potential, what I would say, aggressive and optimistic timeline of a potential February election. I've shared with you before, that is just not something possible from a capacity perspective. We just can't do that. So we have to really think about, well, I would recommend taking February. We couldn't even get the documents in now in a realistic fashion and to be ready for February. So the next options for you would be April or May. April, the issue with April is that we will have only been back from spring break for 1 week by the time that election date comes. So in terms of an educational campaign and making sure that people have access to the polls, if that were to be the case, that's an issue with April. May of those 2 is probably a better option. I struggle with an August date simply to try to make sure that we're able to levy or to put forward an effective information campaign with people, I think, really wanting to continue to enjoy coming out of the pandemic and enjoying summer and doing all sorts of different things. And then another option would be next November. Now, next November, of course, is really toward the end of when we'd be able to take advantage of that retiring debt from the high school or from the middle school, Bridgewater and other associated projects. But that would also be an option as well. There is not a general election on the ballot in November of 2023. So with all of the things that I have just shared with you, those are all things where the school district would need to run the election. So we would need to either run the election ourselves or contract with one of our other governmental agencies who does that kind of work all the time, which is certainly a possibility. So I do want to just come back. I mentioned this before, but the last item in my report is really, we know there's 50%, around 50%, plus or minus 4.8% support for an ice arena. We know that that's substantially less support than what we saw in the other questions, right, in the survey. We know that from the data. It doesn't make the problem go away. It doesn't make the dilemma any less. It just means that we have to try to lean into finding out what does that mean. And again, I want to emphasize that the city and the school district just met today. Again, seeking, are there ways of a public-private partnership that could potentially reduce how much public investment would need to happen in that facility. So we are not tonight at the point where it's game time, to make a call, but we are coming very close in order to be able to run any kind of effective informational campaign. Capital projects levies, we had a shorter window. We'll talk about the incredible success of those questions. Different animal, right? I mean, different level of need of education. A shorter window was clearly effective. We are going to need a window to make sure that whatever pathway we determine we're going to go through at the high school, that we have enough time to make sure that we are able to explain to people the need, give people numerous opportunities to tour the facility, and a number of other pieces just to make sure that voters are aware when you're going to ask them to vote, what are the things that they're getting out of it, what is the tax impact, what is the vision. I think there's a lot of different things that people think about when they hear new or remote. We want to make sure people know exactly what they'd be voting on, that they have as clear of a pathway forward as possible. So we are getting close to crunch time here, right? We're not there tonight, but we are very close. So if you can give me some feedback about where you land or stand as of right now, that will help me bring you something that hopefully we'd be able to get to consensus on. That's my report.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, so we'll hear from the board members. If you want to share where you're leaning or if there's any information that you need from Matt, you can bring it another time. Just your initial thoughts on the example question. Okay, Julie.
Okay, thank you. So I appreciate Dr. Hillman walking us through, the broad analysis of the voter survey, talking about the work that this sitting board has done in the last year, but also I appreciate him acknowledging the work that the board at the time, 5 years ago, 2017, some of us who are still seated board members, I think that it's really important to review what we learned from our voters 5 years ago. So in 2017, we had a $109 million 25-year bond that was rejected by the voters at a percent of 56%. So if we look back, that tax impact in 2017 for a $300,000 home was $364. So if we look forward then to 2022, the most current tax impact that we understand in a $300,000 home would be $310. So the 310 versus 364 in 2017. So this $310 for a $100 million bond is obviously significantly higher than the documented tolerance of 135 that we've heard from the voter survey results, which over 50% more than what the community has expressed their tax tolerance. So as we know, in 2018, we came back with a $41 million 20-year bond that was supported at a level of 62% yes. So what I have heard and what we have worked on and board members' comments weighing in, appreciate, everyone's position. I understand there's some great passion about moving forward with Pathway 2 that would include a new multi-story academic wing for $80 million. However, I think it's critically important that we fully appreciate what we learned from the voter survey. 5 years ago, we were in this same place. What we learned is still the case. Our community has a property tax ceiling that is very real. The case we would make for an $80 million academic wing are in essence the same case we would make that we made in 2017 for a new high school. So to tell our voters the benefits of an $80 million academic wing are in essence the same thing that we told our voters in 2017. New modern spaces, more energy efficient, serving the 21st century learning styles. Now, we made that case over a course of several weeks. There was no stone left unturned in getting information to our voters, yet it was resoundingly rejected. In my view, renovating our current facility that is structurally sound, i.e. Pathway 1, is the best path forward. I believe the improvements that can be made to the classrooms and the addition of an athletic space that will also expand our classroom will serve our students and staff well. It does address our educational need. I'm very confident in what I've seen Wall do with other high schools in terms of renovated spaces. I think we'll have a huge impact to the overall feeling of the building and will shore up a structurally sound building. Now, that said, I don't profess to think that a $77 million bond referendum is a slam dunk. I think it will also be critically important for the district to have ample time to make the case to our voters, so that the timeline of a spring 2023 bond referendum, whether that's April or May, really at this juncture makes the most sense. In terms of ballot questions, in where I would weigh in would be scenario 3, in terms of reaching that $77 million 25-year bond, and then having that additional $3 million if the community were to see their way for an additional support there. I appreciate scenario 4 coming forward. I think that in light of having a longer runway, that we continue, and I know there's great efforts being made to strategize different solutions for the ice arena. And why hope, as they say, hope is not a strategy. My hope would be that we would have a scenario that could play out outside of the school district for an ice arena complex. So that's where I weigh in, where we sit at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, Tom.
A question on your numbers. You had 364 in 2017, which would be, given inflation and whatnot, maybe 400 today. And then 310 doesn't quite jive with 135. So why is there a difference? Or even, that was for 100 million, right? The
Correct.
310, so. But
Yeah,
that,
my numbers may not be accurate
Well,
there,
no, I
but
mean,
what I
that's-
understood is that 100 million would be $310
yeah.
on a $300,000 home. If I read it accurately, the tax table.
Right, and that's what's on the tax table, but so why? You're going from 77 to 100 million and the cost goes from 135 to 310. That seems like the math doesn't quite add up. And what just some simple math I did, it would go up to maybe 168 if the 135 is in addition to is above what the $40 million would buy you, the additional tax costs. So if you went from 40 to 77, that's a 37 million. If you increase that again by 23 million to go up to 100 million, that would maybe be 270 or it doesn't quite add up. So I'm not sure what those numbers are, but I don't know if you want to answer quickly, otherwise we can move on. But
So, I'm not gonna pretend like I followed quite all of that, but my initial, gut reaction is that the $40 million that's coming off does buy down some of that increase. And I will say the difference in tax base from 2017 today is very different. And the taxes that the other taxing jurisdictions have are different. And so all of that plays into the totals and what that means for our taxpayers. But I do not profess to be an expert on it. And so that the first thing that jumped out at me would be it's less because of the 40 million, but that's about all I got with all the things suggested. So I'm not sure if that's helpful, but
yeah, so I don't mean to be talking about, it's like going to buy a car. The first thing you don't talk about is the finances. First thing you talk about is why you want to buy that car, and you sell it on what we're gaining for that. But those numbers are for today. I mean, and as you pointed out, the tax base has increased, and that's probably going to continue. So the tax burden over years is going to decrease.
in theory,
Okay.
yes, for that particular, but there's, again, I couldn't articulate that would be visible to a taxpayer
Right.
because there's other things that come into play. And if I could just make a comment, when we talk financing, if I'm going to buy a car and I'm going to finance it, or I'm going to buy a house and I'm going to finance it, I get pre-approved by my bank, so I know how much is appropriate for me to lend and, what I can manage. And so I feel like this is somewhat relatable. Like, we aren't paying for it as a district, the taxpayers are, and so we have to understand what they're willing to pay for. So that's just my 2 cents on the subject, but I'll let you keep going.
Yes, thank you, and that's a good point. But they don't necessarily know at this point what they're getting for it. I mean, other than the 400 people who were surveyed and the little bit of information, and as we know, people don't necessarily follow things. So just a couple questions. Do we know any more about any possibilities of ice rinks, ice arenas outside of the school district? And if not, do we know when we might know?
So that conversation is ongoing, and I can't give you a timeline, but what I will tell you is that the partners continue to come together to try to seek other solutions, Tom. So if hopefully we have a solution, tomorrow. I don't think that's gonna happen. I don't have a meeting scheduled between now and then. But the point is, there are a number of people who are working really hard behind the scenes to make sure that if we are able to garner some kind of public-private support, that we would have it in plenty of time before final language is created for a ballot or something along those lines.
Right, well, not knowing that makes some of the other stuff a little more murky, but so, I've mentioned this several times. I'm not going to give the same speeches, but and we got some letters from people in the community who support pathway 2 of a new academic tower. The school board, several members here came to the conclusion 5 years ago that we needed a new school. They didn't propose that we remodel the existing one. They came to the conclusion we needed a new one, and rightly so, because this one is 60 years old. It's for all kinds of reasons. I mean, so it's ironic that now we're backpedaling and saying, well, we can, remodel this one for the umpteenth time. So I would go with something like scenario 3, but with pathway 2, and that's the only thing that I can support. The May sounds good. Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. You want to share, Jeff? You want to? Lori or Amy? Want to share? Amy?
So I've been on the board 6 years. I still think this is the most important decision that I will be involved in my time on the board. And so it's something I have been thinking a lot about. And I was around back in 2017 when we did the bond referendum that failed. And I have a slightly different take on it than how Julie described, which is we were asking for a lot all at once. We had a levy referendum and a bond referendum, and we were asking for a high school and a elementary school and a bunch of other stuff. And I think the comments I remember is people just saying, that's too much at once. That's too much at once. And we had gone that path because we had been given a facilities plan that said we needed both, and we were asked which one we would prioritize. And we didn't have any knowledge of how would we prioritize this? Which one is more important, the elementary school or the high school? So we just said, let's go for both. And I think we learned a very important lesson from the taxpayers that we can't do everything all at once. But we did always say we'd come back to them about the high school, and to expect that we'd come back when the levy money, ending it. So this is the time period that we had told everyone. So we're here now, and we're looking at the high school, and I think we've scaled back to no, we can't have a brand new high school. I think we've realized that that's asking a lot, especially since the price of a brand new high school jumped from 80 million to 120 million in that time period. So we sort of lost a window there of getting that at a more reasonable price. And we're looking at scaling back and doing something a little different. And I'm still thinking what we really need for our students is something that would bring the high school to the 21st century, and something that would be light and airy and, make the students feel like, wow, I want to be in this high school. This is a positive place to be, a place that I feel good in. And so that's sort of my vision of how do we get there from, we're sort of kind of dark high school with small cramped spaces in some areas, and the hallways are too narrow and all of that. So, we all know all the problems with the high school. I don't need to recite them all. So going with that, I have a couple questions. The first is that we've heard lots of different numbers, from $80 million to do the tower, to $70 million, which was that first set of numbers. If we did everything that the high school task force came up with, not including the field house, it was $70 million. And now, Matt, you're telling us $60 million. And I don't know what those price tags would buy, really. And so that part of it is a real visioning process for me. So my first question is, what do we get? Can I still have the light and airy spaces? Can we still have a good solid building that's going to last for another 60 years that we can, or more, that we can hand on to the taxpayers? Or are we going to be back at this problem in 20 years again, and the taxpayers are going to go, well, maybe we need a new high school. So that's my first question. I need to be able to envision what all these different figures mean. Then as part of that, while I agree that athletics are important, I really do agree that they're important. My question is, I would still put academics first. And is there a way to plan the high school in such a way that if we can only get $77 million or $80 million, and we could only build the new classroom addition, that we could save a spot for a field house addition at some point in the future? So we get one big piece of it now and do that big step, and then in 10 years or whenever the right time is, we go back and say, can we get this field house? We've really been needing it for 15 or more years, but we had to prioritize. And I would prioritize the academic side of things and say, let's make sure we're really giving the community a high school that's going to last and last a long time. So that's that question. I would love to get the field house. I do believe that we need an ice arena. So I'm hoping like Julie, that it can be done, not through the school district, but I think we have to be planning for both possibilities. So I would be willing to put it on the ballot as well. My first focus is on the students and what's best for the students, because while the voters definitely have to be considered, they get to vote. They get to tell us what works for them. While the students don't have the vote the same way. We represent the students. So I like the layered approach of an academic part, whatever that would be, and that's where I need the visioning. Then the field house. Then if the hockey rink still needs a home, the hockey rink would be it on there. And then I truly understand why we need the artificial turf. I think that's also something that could wait 5 years or whatever, but I'm happy to have a 4-part question and let the voters decide how much they're willing to spend on our high school. Date-wise, I'm leaning toward April, but I'm flexible with May. April, I think it's right back. There's no school on April 4th. So people might be actually taking care of the kids that day, you know, our families, and maybe they would be able to get to voting. And of course, I don't think it matters as much for the non-student families, whether it's April or May. So if we're only worried about the student families might still be on spring break, I'm not that worried. The one question I have is, how much time do we really need to educate everybody about why we're asking for this and why it's important to us? And that would be the most important question in choosing the timing for me. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Did you say scenario 4 or you wanted?
well,
Not entirely, right? 'Cause you
Yeah,
wanted-
I went through the whole thing. I'm like,
Yeah.
well, let's ask every question and let the voters decide. But obviously one is, each one builds on the one before.
Thank you. Anybody else want to share or give their comments? Corey?
Amy's
Oh,
question.
sure.
So if I'm just gonna go in order of what I recall the questions to be. The first one is, you're right. Anytime that you have had the breadth of the discussion that we have had about different options to the facility, you are going to go through a range of different numbers, right? And so the task force component, one of the things, there's some of those that were duplicated, right? There were some costs in those recommended. So for example, if you took care of one component, that might mean you don't need to spend some additional dollars in another area. So you're right that the number was a bit higher, but what the number you have before you is what we put in the pathways back in August. And that was based on our work with Wold about what it would take to do that full remodeling of the building. So I feel very confident in that $60 million number, that we could do a very high quality remodeling. And I think it's important we talk renovation. When I think of renovation, I think of upgrading what you have. When I think about remodeling, I think about reimagining some of the spaces. So your point about the vision is important. And I think that when I think about it, when I think of a true remodel of that building, I think about things like potentially making the roof of the upper cafeteria taller, right? To match the media center roof, or reimagining the lower calf, the upper calf, and the media center space as all one location, right? If you think about reimagining that part, you think about things like new lighting, you think about things like new flooring, you think about things like new windows in terms of, if you were to think about a traditional high school window setup, you've seen those. There are 3 smaller, narrow windows that are sequenced together, but it really has one entire outline, replacing those 3 windows with one larger window, if that makes sense. Again, talk about bringing natural light. We've learned a lot. I encourage you to think about what I think is one of the signature parts of the elementary bond issue, which is the Spring Creek Media Center. And I think if you think about what that building felt like before that, and then you think about what simply some borrowed light and some glass pieces on the side of the media center did for that, it's one of the parts of the 2018 bond referendum that I'm the most proud of. I mean, that took a truly dark space and transformed it into something that is delightful, I think is the only word that I would use. So learning about how to use borrowed light, potential, windows in some of the classrooms to the hallway. Remember, the high school is interesting because the vast majority of those classrooms do have external light because of the way the building was constructed, right? Almost every classroom, with the exception, I would say, of about 6, and then 8 if you include the band and the choir, have some kind of outdoor, they have some kind of window to the outside. So I think that that's a significant piece, and that lends you to work. So in terms of the light and airy part, I do think that we can get there with the remodel. Is it going to be as good or as exciting as a brand new class? Of course not, right? New construction versus remodeling, but I do think we can do some really good pieces with that. The $60 million figure is what we worked with Wold on, what we thought would really be the full remodel component of that. So just, I know that that's not quite a perfect vision as of yet, but that is, I do feel confident in that dollar. So that was the first question. Now remind me of the second question. I lost it as I was visioning because that happens to me. Sure. Great question. So the truth is that you can sequence different parts of a facility in lots of different ways, right? You certainly can, because we're going to use the same site. So the fact would be that anything that we would do, you could certainly sequence different parts of the plan over different years. So absolutely, a person or an organization could put out something like the classroom tower, like in Pathway 2. the land that we have is still going to be there for the field house because we are looking at putting it on our own property. So could that be done? Absolutely, it could be done over a period of time. The question is, how many times do you want to come back to the voters over several years? Val is going to weigh in.
I think the only thing that might complicate that idea is that we are required, if we add square footage, to do the storm shelter.
Fair point. So
That
the
works
storm
well
shelter,
with the field house.
it does, that's fair. So Val's point about, once we add on to the facility, we have to add the new statutory storm shelter. And I frankly, I'm not sure we would want to take the space within a new classroom top tower to do that because it's got to be concrete with a concrete roof. So that's where the field house does lend
It's be in
itself.
the cafeteria or the auditorium or. it
Could be.
yeah, 'cause that's what we had talked about at one
That's
point.
true. It could be. I do think that if we're envisioning a light and airy cafeteria space, that making that the storm shelter would inherently diminish that potential. The auditorium, possibly, for sure, because that is a space that you want to have enclosed. So that was your second question. I think that those were the bulk of the two.
Right, and then those are the main questions. What do we get for the money? And
You're going to get a remodeled building. And as we get closer to that, we can certainly, we will not get, if we want drawings of what it's going to look like, that is not going to happen, right? That's an unusual piece to do at this point. We can get conceptual, right? You can get some conceptual drawings of some of the outside, but the detail level drawing, very few architects will do that unless you pay for it. We'll do that before, as Val said, before you get the approval of your funding.
I guess I still would lean toward the new building until again, it's a
addition.
lot of, yeah, and it's some sort of addition with possibly having to put the field house as at a later time. Unless I understand better what that $60 million is going to do.
And I do think it's important for people to understand, if you're just tuning into this for the first time, that pathway 2 includes both an addition that would be a multi-story instructional space tower and the remodeling of some of the facility and some demolition of some of the existing facilities. So it isn't $80 million just for that tower, right? It is the $80 million for the tower, for the demolition of part of the building to stitch it together, and then the remodeling of the remainder of the facility. So what you put in that classroom tower, there's a variety of ways that you could look at doing that. So I think that those are, I just think if you're new to the conversation, you need to understand it isn't just about, building, it's not building a new building, right? It's building an addition, doing a little bit of strategic demolishing of some of the oldest areas of the facility, and then remodeling the remainder of the facility that would stay. Things like the V-wing that would stay, things like the gymnasium, a lot of the existing classroom places that would stay in the places that aren't the oldest part of the building. So just if people are new to the conversation, I just want to make sure they understand that component of the vision.
So this is a question for either Val or Matt. I'm not sure you can answer it, but looking at the tax table that was most recently given to us on October 17th, which is dated September 1st, I'm trying to see where the $135 bond capacity comes from. This shows that $165 would get us $60 million, and we're being told that 135 gets to 65. So I'm curious what changed from September 1. I assume interest rates have done nothing but gone up since then. So I would have thought that the capacity would actually be worse and not better. So I'm curious if there's anything that can be shared to help us understand how we get that number.
Off the top of my head, I do think because all of the entities are doing their preliminary levy certifications and all of those things, there's better data now about how much the tax impact is going to be for all of those things. And we have the tax base and all of that data kind of more firm, I will say. And so that would be my first hunch as to what would be the difference. And definitely the interest rates play into that for sure. But I can certainly get some more information for you.
Yeah, I'd just be curious about what changed, because it's a dramatic shift from what we thought maybe would be 55 to 65 million. And then we hadn't discussed a 25-year bond and that level of bond. We'd only saved that for 100 million. So I'm interested in hearing more about the 25-year option, but because 77 million obviously gives us more opportunity to do things with, but that was pretty fresh when we got the packet. So still trying to think through the totality of that number and what that says to the public in terms of their tax capacity, because, go ahead.
Yeah, and I do think we will have Ellers write some additional analysis for you, but just think about, we did have a tax base increase, right? Now, it's a combination of some new property and increased valuation, right? We have to understand, a lot of it is, a lot of that increase in the tax base is due to increased valuation. So I just invite you to think, the piece you had was dated September 1. That's the latest one that we have run, because we don't want to have them run it every single month. But if you think about the levy, the preliminary levy that you certified, our district has a preliminary levy increase. That's the amount of the total levy that we're going to put across the entire school district, of an increase of 5%. And yet the average taxpayer, if their house were to stay the same, their taxes would go down, right? So that's the impact of an increasing tax base. You can have an increase and people across the entirety of how much you're levying. And because of the increase in the tax base at that point, you see a decrease in people's property taxes if their home was valued at the same amount as the previous year, which we all know is very unlikely. But the point is, I think that shows the power of that increase in the tax capacity within the system. And I do think that that is the major difference that we're talking about here, Corey. And 25 years, I'm simply looking at a 25-year. You think about investing, and I think this goes to Amy's point. If we remodel this building, right, whatever we put into this, we are committing the community for at least a quarter of a century, right? Once you do windows, you're committing to that building for certainly, for 25 years. And so I hope that I'm still the superintendent 25 years from now. I'd be the oldest one in the state at 76 years old then. But the fact is that, well, maybe I'd be the oldest one in the state. But the point is that whatever we do, it's going to be a solution that is going to be for at least 25, even the minimum level, right, is for 25 years. And so I think taking advantage of that additional bonding ability, I think one of the things that we have talked about here tonight is in 2017, if we had done it all at the same time, we would have had a better deal than we're offering you this time around, right? And so we know that construction costs and those things are going to continue to increase. And so the question is going to be, if we do this now, we're able to get a bulk of it done now, that would be advantageous in the long run for our taxpayers, as all of the other kinds of things. Just looking from 2017 to now, the substantial increase in what the costs are, I think that is a harbinger that we should pay attention to in terms of thinking about how much are we able to get done in the short term.
So I think I've been pretty consistent for 6 months saying that we all have vision for what we want this to be. And going back to the car analogy, if we asked everyone what their favorite car is, what they think a nice car is, we're going to get 7 different answers here tonight. I would love to go buy a Mach-E tomorrow, Mustang Mach-E, but it's not in my budget. So I have to be realistic about what I can do with the money I have. I don't want us to discount the 400 people we've surveyed. And I've heard a couple comments here tonight that seem to want to disregard that. And I think the statement was very clear from these folks. I mean, less than 20% of people said they were willing to give us $225 per year, and less than 10% of people combined were willing to give us $300 per year. And to do something bigger and grander than what's proposed in front of us tonight as possible 4 scenarios would get close to those numbers. And I just don't think it's feasible. I don't think the community has that tax ceiling in mind. And ironically, of the highest amount requested, $300 per year of those 400 people, the highest level of support came from homes that have fewer than or who make less than $25,000 a year. So I think we have to keep those things in mind, that it doesn't matter what we want. It's what people will actually give us. And trust me, I would love to do Pathway 2. I would be interested in hearing about a new high school. We're not going to get that type of money from this community. So what can we do to build our school for the best, for the future, for students? I have 2 kids coming through the high school in the next 10 years. I want to give them something better than what's there now. And that's what we've been talking about for 6 months. And I think we can do that with what the 400 people who told us what we can do with that. I think I would encourage everyone to really think about what we can do with what we're being given. That said, I would stick with scenario 2 or 3. May is fine with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. Jeff, do you want to make some comments?
Yeah, I mean, I talked to a lot of people while campaigning and they say the taxes are plenty high in Northfield and Dundas and not to say, I mean, I look at what's the most we've ever spent on a building? Is it 23 million?
I think the most that we've ever spent on a building would have been the 36 million for the middle school,
Today's dollars, that'd be what? That's hard
Oh.
to say.
100 million or
yeah.
more for sure.
I kind of really go back. I'm not really sold on, I want to see what you're going to do with ICE, whether that's an on-campus or off-campus thing. And I look at it from a tax basis. And actually, I mean, even before we looked at all this stuff, I'm election-wise, I'm really, if you're going to ask the taxpayer for money and this kind of money, I mean, it should be for everybody, be for the rural areas. It should be for getting people to go and vote on things when they're normally going to vote on things. And to me, that would be on an odd year or on an even year, which we were talking about all this. I was even, and again, I start at the 40 million because that's where you're really at, where you're not really, because we got about that coming off the tax roll, right? So if you're looking at that, if you're saying, hey, if we do it and I even call it a maintenance bond, and you're looking at the part one of that, with the maintenance bond, to figure out where you're at. And then realistically, what's the next bump up? It's probably $20 million. So it's a matter of what can you really get done for 40 and what can you get really done for 60? And what's the sweet spot of the bat that people would vote for to actually pass in a sense. But I'm not more about the car analogy. A Ferrari would be great, but I can't afford a Ferrari. But I think that that's an analogy, the car analogy, but it's actually who's going to make the payment on the car. I mean, that's really the big question. I think we're at 40 to 60 for something that's maybe realistic. But like I said, I called it a maintenance bond just to kind of fix up the parts on that too. But it's like, if you're going to ask and you're within that realm, maybe there's question one for whatever you're at, and then question two, and maybe is 80 million too much to ask for, or you do this in phases. I've always looked at this as kind of a phase thing as far as, people looking at, and maybe you ask a lot of times for the big number and maybe you don't get it. But I think that what's a responsible approach. And I think it's a matter, and I think surveys are fine, but I mean, when we do a lot of these public, awareness, we just don't get a lot of people to show up. I mean, that's kind of the interesting, or not interesting part of that. And I don't know, I think that as a former mortgage broker, residential, but I think, I think it's a fairly decent argument to say that this is one of the highest inflationary periods obviously. And, the interest rates from home mortgages in the last, 6 months went from like 3% up like another 4 points. So we're in very high interest rates. So when you're talking about giving somebody what things really cost, you have to give them the number of, the 40 or 60 million, and then what is it going to be over time? What's the total cost? I mean, you have to do that for full disclosure. So I don't know. I think I'm not on times to ask for elections. I mean, I would definitely prefer to have an odd or even, but I'm not even remotely, I wouldn't do anything other than in November. So, I mean, I'm a flat out no, if you don't, just go on November. So.
Do you have a preferred of those scenario options, Jeff?
I'm still more on the maintenance part, and then maybe ask it a second question. I'd have to think about that, but I still think there's too many variables out there with ICE and whether that's going to be on campus or off. So, I mean, it's kind of half baked.
If I can just so to be super clear, if we are involved in ICE, it has to be on campus.
Right.
We are not going to be allowed by the Department of Ed to put ICE anywhere other than our campus. So if we are involved, if we are the bonding agent for it, we are required to put that on our campus. And there's a couple of examples of facilities that school districts attempted to seek voter approval for that were off their campus. One of which I know where I think there were some pretty good arguments, and the Department of Ed gave it a negative review and comment, which is not good, because you can still pass it, but you have to get 2/3 of the voters to agree with you. That's a challenge, right? So just to be really clear, if we are involved in the bonding for ICE, we have to host. I don't see a path where we could do it where it is not on our campus. If another agency were to do it, we could continue to lease the facility, right? Like we always have, using our lease levy authority. But if we are involved in the bonding for it, it will be on our campus. That has to happen that way.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, Tom, you want to make another comment?
If I can. So the car thing wasn't about, a Ferrari or a gold-plated steering wheel or anything. That isn't what Pathway 2 is about. So the point of the car is that you want to know what you're getting for the money you're spending. And that's what the salesman does. I mean, they convince you, they tell you what you're getting, make you want it, and then they take you in and you figure out the finances. Sure, you go in knowing about how much you can afford. But if you really want something, you'll find a way to maybe afford a little bit more. You may decide that, well, I'll maybe not take a vacation this year, whatever. You worry about, you can attend to the finances after you know what you're getting. And right now, I don't think a lot of people know what they're getting or what they could get. And I'm not sure. I really do, living in the community for 20 years. And every time I've talked about it, I was talking to someone in Cub on Sunday. And the part about a new high school came up, and the head was shaking that, no, we're not going to remodel. I think, I really believe this, otherwise I wouldn't get so worked up and passionate about it, that Pathway 2 will work. And if we go like Amy says, if you put, gosh, I'd rather try and fail and than not try. And that's a failure. It'd be like the Vikings saying, well, we're down by 14 points or whatever, we're just going to quit now because that's what the survey said. No, or kids, students, don't shoot for the stars. Don't try and be the best you can be, because survey says, you took that test in 8th grade and it says you're not going to achieve anything. So I think we can do more as a board and as a community. And I think, like Amy says, you put the Pathway 2, if that passes, then you have the field house. If that passes, the next, possible ice rink or the turf or whatever. But you give the people an option. And how much does an election cost? Roughly.
40 grand,
Okay.
36 to 40.
So like a lot of the other districts, like Owatonna and others, if it were to fail, that would be real solid data point, and it would cost us $40,000 and time and whatnot. But if it passed, the only way to know is to ask. And we got letters from some people in the community today who, are in favor of a new modern facility that is going to take us into the 21st century. I mean, you look over the lifetime of a student, how much has changed over the lifetime of a bond of 20 years or 25 years ago. 20 years ago, what was the world like in and try and predict that out. And we could spend $60 million now, and in 30 or 40 years, we would have the same place with the same problems. And you'd have to spend what, $180, $200 million to fix that. And, I wouldn't want to be the one that they would look back on and say, well, gosh, why did you make that decision when you could have done something else? And so I'm since the get-go, I've been Pathway 2. Nothing has convinced me to change that. I get the economy. It's in one situation now, and a year from now, who knows? And over the course of any bond or anything. A lot changes over that time, so you can't just look at it today and say, well, that's the way it's going to be forever. And I think we have to think bigger and older and with greater vision or whatever, but I think we can do better. And I think the community would expect us. I think if we came with a remodel, we would hear about it, and not in a good way. So anyway, I've said this all before, but I'm stuck on pathway 2. Sorry.
Thanks, Tom. Any other comments? Yes, Corey.
If I may. Tom, I've appreciated your perspective all along, but what I'm struggling with is you're giving more weight to 4 emails we received today and 1 interaction at Cub Foods than 400 people who are phoned and asked these very questions. They will not give us the money to do that. It's plain and simple. And I realize, but I give you more credit for saying, if we don't ask, we don't know. So I appreciate you putting that out there, because I don't know that you've said it that way before. And I appreciate saying, hey, the worst they can do is say no. I think there's more nuance than that. I really do. But I appreciate you putting it that way and not just saying, well, intuition or these anecdotal meetings I've had, because I had the same anecdotal meetings pre-survey, and all 7 of us with Noel agreed that we need to hear from more people. We've done that now, and we have the data in front of us, and now we have to make a decision based on that. So that's all.
Thank you. So I don't want it to become a debate. We really are looking for some comments on the ballot questions that Matt brought forward. Do you want to make some additional comments after him? Okay. Tom, I do want to give you space if you want to add an additional comment. I just want to be careful that we don't turn it into a debate between different ends of the conversation.
I just want to say about the survey is again, it was sort of a blind survey. And if we had the people known more about it ahead of time, and then they've been surveyed and the data came back the same, then okay, fine. Then I would say, okay, that's reasonable. That's reasonable data, but it was blind, and we didn't go up going with the A team and trying to convince people and tell them what they could get. So, I mean, that's why, I mean, I get the survey, but I take it with a grain of salt myself.
Appreciate that. Okay. But my comments are not all that new either. I appreciate the comments that Julie made and that Corey have made. I think I lean more in that direction of first of all, trusting the survey, because it was a scientific survey in that they called 400 people. They had a breakdown of the demographics, and we were able to see that it was not swayed in that way, that when we survey the people that are in my network, they're going to come back similar to those letters that we got by email. The people in my network are all going to say, let's build a new high school. But this survey was very helpful to me. It really helped me see a cross-section of our community, and that they are, number one, something we can celebrate, very supportive of the district. And they're excited about doing improvements on the high school. And so we can celebrate that. But they did specifically say they will only pay so much, in terms of tax. So I personally trust those results, and I trust that it is a good representation of our community and the people who are going to vote and people who are going to come out and support increasing their taxes to see our high school improved. So that's very exciting to me. I don't see adding the ice arena. I think there was one of the slides showed 50%, just a little over 50%. And then when people were given more information during that phone survey, their support actually went down, where we saw in the other questions, the athletic question and high school improvements, very high support in the 60s, and then given more information and we got more support. So I don't personally see adding the ice arena, so I wouldn't go for scenario 4. Let's see. Also, Morris Leatherman suggested that 135, an increase of $135 a year was possible. So the one slide really showed we get the most support at about $75 a year. And so if somebody like me who's trusting the results of this phone survey, then I feel like 135 is really pushing it to that very limit. And so that, makes me a little bit tentative. I think I would do I would do either scenario 2 or scenario 3, and I would look to see it happen in May. Those are my comments. Any additional comments?
So I really appreciate, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead, Tom.
And we've been maybe advised against this, but $135 a year is $11 a month. $75 or whatever, that's $6 a month, which is less than what the levy was potentially increased. So that's per month. And I guess people have to figure if they can afford an extra $10, $15, $20 a month on their budget for the facilities.
Yeah, and I saw that the questions that were asked were explaining some of the updates that we wanted to see at the high school, and then it was connected to how much are you willing to pay, and they were asked a series of questions escalating that amount. So I personally don't see that there's a disconnect between the survey questions and the amount of tax asked, and that people did consider how much they're willing to support financially. And that's why I would land on, like I said, scenario 2 or 3.
Yeah, I just want to tell people this is one of the reasons I love working here, is that this is a really great discussion. You have given me enough to where I can start moving forward with giving you some potential, some more concrete pathways. So we'll plan to do. I do think that I want to offer something. Something Amy said really struck me in terms of, because typically, as you know, I am a vision person, right? That's the one of my few really good skills. So we could offer prior to the next board meeting, if people did want to meet, we would publish it, we would do all the appropriate things. For people who have an interest, we could meet at the high school prior to the board meeting, say an hour before or 75 minutes before. And I would ask Sal Bagley to be there. And we could give you some more example, like walk to the point and say, this corner of the hallway, imagine, if you will, that these walls come down and create the flexible learning space. And then they can show you then examples of similar projects that they've done. And you could imagine that being there. We could also look at something like the upper cafeteria all the way through the media center, and to have some description of what would a reimagining look like. It is fair for us to be able to give people as much of a description as we can, right? There are limits to the description that you can give people prior to a vote, right? There just are limitations to that. But if that is something that board members have an interest in, we could post that, right? Just like anything else. We would come back here for the board meeting, just because this is clearly a better space, to hold this. We have all the technology and all those things. But we could certainly, if people have we don't have to decide that tonight, but if people have that interest, we would post it ahead of time. We could meet at the high school at, say, 4:45 or something like that, 4:30 or 4:45. We wouldn't go classroom by classroom. We could visit 1 or 2 classrooms to show, imagine what this would look like if it was 1 window as opposed to 3. We could talk about some of those specific spaces where you could potentially reduce a classroom, but increase flexible learning space. So those kinds of things would happen regardless of pathway 1 or pathway 2, right? There'd be some of those kinds of things that could happen regardless. So would that be helpful to your point? I mean, I heard that very loud and clear, Amy.
Since we would be coming back here for a meeting anyway, it seems like we could have this tour on any day that worked for everybody, instead of trying to make it fit right in,
I also know Sal Bagley will be here on the 28th of
Okay,
November.
That's different. Then it makes sense. I got it.
Sure.
Who asked for it, so I will be there.
So again, if that's something that people have an interest in, if you can just let Anita or I know, and we can, put that together. That might be helpful for some people to help you with some of the nuanced parts, because that is fair to say. So.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
And thank you for the discussion. I appreciate it.
Good. Thank you, everybody. The good comments. And so what's next?
So what's next is I will take the information that people have brought here tonight, and I will give you a recommendation about where I think we should spend our energy, based on that, at the next meeting. Of course, you have the final say, but I'm going to try to coalesce all your different pieces into at least no more than 2 potential options is where I'm going with, but you'll most likely get a recommended option from me as well.
All right, Tom?
Just real quick, so when would that vote be for the recommended option?
So I think there's a couple of different pieces. We would probably bring something forward in December. Because I do think it's fair, while we do have a change in the board, I do think it's fair that this board, the sitting board, who has done a lot of the work, has an opportunity to do its final weigh in, in terms of what's next for this. So I do think it's fair that this board has the chance to make, now, of course, we won't adopt actual ballot language, right? Because there's certain timeframes and things like that, but I am committed to making sure that you have an opportunity to vote on this before this board concludes its service.
Very good. Okay, now we have Dr. Hillman presenting on the Child Nutrition Department reorganization.
So in your package, you have a document talking about some reorganization of the district's child nutrition department. So we have been considering extending the Director of Child Nutrition's contract for quite some time. The current contract, which is at 43 weeks, is really a holdover going way back to when we would close the kitchens 1 week after the conclusion of the school year and start them up 2 weeks before the beginning of the school year. That's an antiquated method. We have been providing support through federal programs to the community for several years, even pre-pandemic. So we had been looking at the potential of extending the child nutrition director's contract for some time. In the past couple of weeks, we have had a resignation and we are disappointed. It's in tonight's packet. We're disappointed that our longtime child nutrition administrative assistant, Stephanie Deatter, is leaving the district. She's done a great job for us over the years and we're disappointed to see her go, but we wish her well as she moves forward. Of course, anytime we have a resignation in that kind of way in a district office department, we take a look and say, is there a different way to rethink this? So what you have before you is a proposal that we're not asking you to vote on tonight. For the last 6 weeks, we have been test running, integrating the child nutrition administrative assistant's duties with our district office receptionist position. It was initially on an interim basis. In a review of that so far, both that individual who have been doing that work at an interim basis, the director of child nutrition, Stephanie Strummy, our district office feels that has been going very well. And it's been able to be integrated into those duties in a way that is a very positive way to do it. So our recommendation is that we would increase the director of child nutrition from 43 to 52 weeks. The existing child nutrition administrative assistant was a 52-week position. We are recommending that we integrate the existing child nutrition administrative assistant responsibilities with the district office receptionist. What that would do is we would take that individual from class 2 to class 4 within the office employee agreement. We would eliminate the former child nutrition administrative assistant position. So there would be a total savings of $32,198. But interestingly, it would actually save the general fund $36,229 because we would be able to code 60% of that class 4 receptionist position to child nutrition. Because remember, child nutrition is a separate and highly regulated fund, but we would be able to code 60% of the district office administrative assistant, receptionist / child nutrition administrative assistant to that child nutrition budget. So we are always looking at, are we able to do things more efficiently? Are we able to combine duties and those kinds of things? And this is an example of where we can. And I know $36,000 savings to the general fund might not sound like a lot to a lot of folks. And on a $60 million budget, I'm not trying to pretend it is, but it goes to the example that we do make sure that we are good stewards in looking at, are we able to provide a similar set of services at a more efficient rate? So again, no action requested tonight. I will ask that you act on it at the next meeting. Be happy if there are any questions.
Julie, you have a question?
I just want to comment that I really appreciate this proposal and it's just, heartening for the board and for the community to see how we do live and breathe stewardship every day. I think that it really, I just appreciate that you recognize an opportunity to do something different. And, ultimately save on the general fund. What I'm most, pleased about is that we would be moving, Stephanie Strummy from 43 to 52 weeks. Honestly, that she does an amazing job and quite honestly, knowing that she does it in less weeks is even that much more amazing. So to me, that's one of the best aspects of this proposal. So thank you for bringing it forward.
Thank you, Julie. Any other comments or questions?
I do want to point out one more thing is just the way we are going to make this change retroactive due to a variety of reasons, back to July 1 for the Director of Child Nutrition, and then back to October 3rd for the district office receptionist. Just I want to be transparent about that.
Okay, next we have a policy committee recommendation on policy 655, and this will be an item for individual action at the next board meeting. Want to make any comments, Dr. Hammond?
It is simply an update to the school volunteer policy. Again, some of it is just putting it in alignment with our current style that we're using with policies, and then also some additional substance in the policy itself. Not, I wouldn't consider it to be a significant change, but there's enough changes where we want the board to approve it.
Okay, and I had a couple of questions about it. Are any other board members have questions? I wanted to know in the policy here, it talks about volunteers having to go through a background check. And I wondered if the policy needs to describe who pays for that, who's responsible for that, if it needs to go into that level of detail. And then also if any mention of programs such as AmeriCorps needs to go into this policy. I imagine, well, I mean, this is talking about getting pre-approval. I imagine that happens building wide through some kind of.
Yeah, that's a great question on the AmeriCorps part. We'll take a look at that and see. So AmeriCorps is a little, yes, they are volunteers, but it's a specific
program.
agreement that we make with that particular organization. So this particular policy, in my mind, is not designated toward those kinds of volunteers. It is toward the folks who are coming in to go on field trips and to volunteer reading in the classroom, things like that on a fairly regular basis. So, but we are gonna review that in terms of between now and the next meeting about should it cover AmeriCorps or not? There's a whole bunch of other requirements just to be with AmeriCorps, including the background checks and
Well,
those
imagine
pieces.
there's some programs coming from St. Olaf too.
Yeah, and so all of those, anything with St. Olaf or Carleton, those folks are governed by this background check or by this school volunteer policy. And my initial take is I don't think that the policy needs additional detail on the volunteer background check, because this is saying, the board is saying that you will have a volunteer background check, and then it would be the administration's duty to execute that volunteer and to be able to do the procedures, if that makes sense. So I think that the higher level of just saying that there's going to be a background check that meets the similar expectations as those people who are employed by the system. What we do is we do use the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension free background check. That is a robust background check for most school volunteers. There are certain circumstances. If there's a volunteer going for an overnight field trip, there are certain volunteer experiences where we do have them do the paid background check but for the vast majority of them, they are using the BCA. So I don't think it's necessary to go into the process details, but we'll review it just to make sure that we feel we have hit it well enough to cover all of that.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Corey.
I was just gonna say that the building administrators take it seriously. I had to do one a few weeks ago to go in the classroom. Do you know who I am? No, I didn't say that. So I had to do it. I was like, am I not in the system?
Yeah, and
Every year.
our I will make sure I bring back to you at some point, which I don't have it tonight, but you would be pre-pandemic and this year, you will be stunned at the number of volunteer background checks that are done every year. It's pretty amazing. And that's, again, our lean HR department does all of that as well.
Wonderful. Okay, now we will hear your superintendent's operation and strategic plan update.
Yes, so I have just 4 items for you on the docket this evening. The first of which is just a thank you. It's a thank you to our community. It's a thank you to our staff and everyone who worked so hard to get the information out about the capital projects, levy questions. And I'm very grateful that once again, in alignment with information that we got about how the community feels about us through the phone survey, with 83% of us giving us an A or a B, the margins of approval on the 2 questions, I think decisive is the appropriate word. So question 1 passed with 68.81% of voters approving it. Question 2 passed with 58.34% of voters approving it. I challenge you to think of nearly anything else that 68% of voters agree on, right? I mean, this is really a substantial vote of confidence in more than one way, for the district. Even if you go to 58%, that is still a substantial amount of agreement. So I think it goes to show that I totally believe that the adage that the voters are always right. And I am truly grateful for how people really came forward and supported us. I think it's a very important, it's a modest ask compared to what we've been talking about tonight. But anytime that you go to the voters and you make your case for why it is needed and you get these kinds of results, it is gratifying. And so I'm very grateful to the voters. I'm grateful for all of the board members, the staff, the parents, board candidates, everyone who made sure that people knew about this and understood what the importance was for the system. And I'll spare you all of the things that you get from the capital projects levy, because you've heard me say it about 600 times, right? So we'll spare you that this evening. I also want to point out that we did have 3 board seats that were up for election. And I want to congratulate newcomers Jenny Nelson and Ben Miller, who will join the board, and incumbent Jeff Quinnell for winning the board seats and serving a 4-year term that will begin in January. And I want to thank Robert Coleman and Ricky Livingston and incumbent Tom Broniak for filing for election and giving a very spirited campaign to give our voters a really great set of choices of different candidates. And we really need to have great people who are willing to step up and serve. So I thank those 3 folks, for coming forward. I did include in the report, I do think there's a tremendous amount of data that is available within the Secretary of State's website. If you're an election nerd like I am, there's all sorts of things at the precinct level that is very interesting. So because I shared that with you. And we'll have an opportunity to talk more about the service that Tom has provided to the board over the last 4 years and the service that Julie Pritchard has provided to the board. We will have more opportunity to talk about that, but I want to thank both of you for your service, because we now know what the board will look like as we move ahead. And we will continue to talk about the legacy that both of you have left in the system as we come into December. So that is around the election. The district services survey is the second part. So I want to share with you, we do several surveys each year to try to determine the effectiveness of our administrative and our overall support for people within the district, families and staff, et cetera. One of the surveys that we do is the district services survey. This survey is conducted every fall. We survey the people that our district offices serve the most directly. So we survey all of the administrative assistants in the district and all of the building or departmental leaders. And they rate the services of each district department in 5 different areas: accessibility, accuracy, attitude, operations, and timeliness. And so there's a 5-point Likert scale. And what you can see is that we are getting very good feedback from the folks who the district services people most directly serve. So you'll see on a 5-point Likert scale, the overall rating was a 4.82. And the top box score, which means what percentage of the indicators across all the respondents did those folks give the top score, which would be a 5, and 84.99% shows the percentage of respondents who gave the highest possible rating. I anticipate we probably had around 48 people or so who could take the survey. We had 39 people who actually completed it. Pretty high percentage of the eligible folks. So we're very pleased with that. And I do want to point out, we started giving the survey in 2018. The screenshot that I put in the report shows in 2018, all we did was survey building leaders right at 10. Then we increased it the next year. You can see we've ranged between 34 and 39 respondents in 19, 21, and 22. We obviously did not do the survey in the fall of 2020. We were building a plane, right, in flight that year. So what you can see is in every single year from 2018 to the fall of 2022, there's been it's not been year over year increase but the majority of them, you'll see a year over year increase. And certainly you've seen substantial improvement, including having a higher number of people participate in those ratings over time. So we take these things very seriously. The responses, what happens is we take those responses, we roll them out to the district office. So I present the full report or a summary of the report to all of the folks in our district office, to our entire leadership team. Then each department rolls out their individual departmental results to their departments. They look at the scores and they say, okay, here are the areas where we did the best. Why are we getting scores in that area? What are the things that we're doing to earn those scores? And then what are the areas that we have an opportunity for improvement? Right now, we're looking at how are we able to maintain these high scores from the people who we have served. We did see a couple of technology services, for example, had a substantial improvement year over year, nearly a full percentage point, like 0.79%, 0.79 points on a 5-point scale. So there's some really good news in this over time. So I wanted to share that, and I've given you the full report without the comments. The comments are important. We share those with departmental leaders, and they have an opportunity to review those individually. They're anonymous comments, obviously. Next item I want to share is it's always great to have a wonderful national signing day. And so last week we had 4 Northfield High School volleyball players sign letters of intent to play either Division I or II college volleyball. They, of course, went all the way to the section final again this year, one of the top teams in the state. And really, many folks thought that our section championship was the preview of what was the state championship. So we congratulate the volleyball team on their great season. And these 4 young people who signed letters of intent to further their education: Sydney Janes, who's going to play volleyball in the SEC at the University of Tennessee; Tegan Timberly, who's going to play Division I volleyball at the University of North Dakota; Quinn Parrish, Southern New Hampshire University; and Annalise Larson at the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology. And so all of those schools are so lucky to have these student athletes join their university communities. And finally, it was referenced earlier tonight, but I did have a chance to attend the seminar last week with AVID at the middle school. AVID stands for Achievement via Individual Determination. We have one cohort this year of 26 students in grade 7 who are participating in the elective course. And that elective course specifically teaches Wicker strategies, and that stands for writing, inquiry, collaboration, organization, and reading. And so these are the kinds of things that we are working to make sure that every student is choice ready. And what that means is that when they graduate, right, with our vision of preparing every student for lifelong success, that they have both the skills and the dispositions to select their preferred pathway after high school, whatever that might be. We will give the board greater opportunity to learn more about AVID. Hope Langston referenced during the World's Best Workforce Report, we had a chance to see some pretty amazing student work examples of how these strategies are being implemented. And I think this is the next piece that I think we're going to get some real return on this investment, specifically when it comes to reducing achievement gaps. So it's evidence-based. It's been very successful in lots of places across the country. And we're very fortunate to be able to start implementing that here. So that's the report tonight.
Thank you. Board members, do you have any comments or questions? Julie?
So I have one comment, and that would be, I think Dr. Hillman deserves an incredible amount of recognition for the work that he did on the capital projects levy, and how you were reaching out to the community, and how many different presentations, and really ensuring that the communication that we gave to our voters was the communication, the information they needed. And clearly that happened. And I think you have this incredibly unique talent and skill to really relate to the voters across a broad section of the demographics of our voters. And you have those really authentic one-on-one conversations. And I think that our results are due in a great part to your work. So I don't think that there is enough ability to really acknowledge all the work that you did to see the success that came as a result of your work. And also acknowledging Anita Ozzie, because anytime you are doing an election levy and board election, there is a great deal of detail and the attention that has to be paid to timelines and dates and paperwork is really incredible and quite stressful. I know. So between the two of you, you are just such a dynamic duo, and that was no more evident than what you were able to do this fall in terms of the capital projects levy and board elections. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
It's our
Julie.
pleasure to do it. And of course, Val does a tremendous amount of support, as does Cole Nelson, being able to give us the examples of the kinds of things that capital projects levy dollars can do. So it is our honor to do the work, and we are, of course, thrilled with the results.
Great job. Anyone else, comments or questions? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Hellman. All right, so we are now on to the approval of the consent grouping. As a reminder, there were some personnel items in the table file added to the consent grouping. Is there anything anyone would like to pull from the consent grouping for separate consideration? Tom?
Not necessarily pull, but in yeah, in one of the policy 524.2, the numbering seems off. It goes from IV to VI to XII to VIII. And I assume it's just some number came off, or are there pieces missing or pieces jumbled around, or?
There are not pieces missing, but it is, we will take care of that pagination issue, which is something we usually catch. But what I'll tell you is the pagination issues with some of the policies, the formatting goes back decades, unfortunately. And so once in a while, it does things despite our best efforts that we aren't able to catch before. We should catch everything, but we will make sure that numbering, there's nothing that's missing.
Okay.
It's a matter of you have to restart. It's a formatting issue, which we will take care of, and I appreciate you catching it. But I think that would be a minor technical modification that shouldn't prevent approval.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the consent grouping? Moved by Tom. Second. Second by Corey. All those in favor of approving the consent grouping, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. All right, items for individual action. We have 4 items for action, 3 of which are resolutions. Janita will facilitate. First, we'll take action on additional English learner support. The school board is requested to approve the addition of a 6.5 hour per day English learner educational assistant for the remainder of 2022-23 school year. The maximum projected cost of salary and benefits for a 7-hour day EA is $29,950. The board is also asked to approve the addition of a 0.45 FTE EL teacher to support the additional students new to the country at a cost of $22,862. And
For the additional table file.
oh yeah, the board is also asked to approve an overload at the high school to support additional EL student needs there for the remainder of the school year at a cost of $10,706. And all of these expenses would be coded to the district's contingency fund. So is there a motion to approve the addition of these positions as outlined in the table file? Okay, moved by Julie, second by Amy. Are there any comments or questions? Dr. Hillman, do you have anything? to
Yeah, I
add?
just want to point out that we did add a couple of components since Hope made the presentation last time to you, and that's because we have had some additional students who have joined us even just since the last time that we spoke with you. And then there were some scheduling conflicts to be able to serve those students. So thus, both the additional ELFTE and the overload, that is the reason for that. In addition, I did put it in the table file accounting. So we used to have 3 FTE that was considered contingency that the administration could actually direct. It's part of the budget, right? It's intended to respond to, oh, we got a bunch of new kids in this area. We need to provide some additional services here because we didn't anticipate those. The budget reductions did take that to 1.5 FTE, roughly $150,000. And right now we are at 1.14 FTE of that has been spent. So we still haven't used all of them. We don't always use it every year, but I want you to know that we're still well within that budgeted amount.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay, so we do have a motion, and this is not a resolution. Okay, so all those in favor say aye.
I,
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Okay, next we have a resolution canvassing the results of the November 8th, 2022 school board election. Is there a motion to approve the adoption of the resolution canvassing returns of votes of the school district's general election? There. Okay, moved by Corey, second by Tom. Any comment you want to make, Dr. Hamlet?
These 3 items are procedural. They are same as how we canvass all different election results.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Anita will facilitate a roll call vote.
Broniak,
Aye.
Butler,
Aye.
Gerwitz. Aye. Gonzalez, George,
Aye.
Pritchard,
I,
Cornell,
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. The next resolution, if there's a motion to adopt the resolution authorizing issuance of certificates of election and directing the school district clerk to perform other election-related duties. Moved by Julie and second by Amy. Thank you. Okay, Anita, do you want to facilitate the roll call vote?
Broniak,
Aye.
Butler,
Aye.
Gerwitz. Aye. Gonzalez, George,
Aye.
Pritchard,
I,
Cornell,
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Okay, item D is our third resolution. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution relating to canvassing returns of the special election held on November 8th, 2022? Moved by Tom, second. Second by Corey. Okay, Anita.
Broniak,
Aye.
Butler,
Aye.
Gerwitz. Aye. Gonzalez, George,
Aye.
Pritchard,
I,
Cornell,
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Our final item for action is to approve the 2022-2023 World's Best Workforce Annual Report as presented. Is there a motion? Moved by Julie, second. Second by Tom. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. All right, items for information. We have the 2022-23 enrollment options and history report provided by Student Information System Specialist Christine Nessett and Director of Finance Val Murdesdorf. Would you like to make some comments?
I can go ahead and do so. So you've got a couple of documents in your packet about the annual enrollment options report. I want to call your attention most importantly to the last page. That's the spreadsheet looking historical document. We do combine a number of districts that only have a few students going there or coming from there into another category. You have the history going back to 2011-12. I think the high level component here is that we will most likely always have a net loss of students in this report. We are one of only 2 school districts in the state that authorize public charter schools. So we are embracing school choice, public school choice here in Northfield. So when we have 134 students going to Prairie Creek and 93 to Arcadia, we know that that's going to have an impact on the net in and out. I do want to point out that we did improve the net loss of students over last year. In 21-22, we had 399 total, a net loss of 399 students. This year, we improved that to negative 375. Couple of highlights that I want to point out. I do want to point out that we did see an increase in students from Northfield who were choosing Randolph. So we saw an increase of 17 students there. I have reviewed the reasons that people put on those forms, and I would say that there's several different categories. One of which are people who are looking for smaller class sizes. Some of which is certainly just geography. I actually live a little bit closer to Randolph. I'd like to go there. And then there's, as with all things, there's a handful of other reasons that are very individualized. So we went from 95 students choosing Randolph last year to 112. Now, at the same time, we still increased the number of students who chose Northfield Public Schools. So we went from 454 open enrollees into the district last year to 464 this year. So while we had a slight increase in the number of students open enrolling to other traditional public schools, 270, we brought in 464 students from other traditional public schools. So if you solely look at open enrollment in and out, we are clearly a winner in that particular statistic. We also see a very St. Dominic school, their enrollment remained very flat, 80 last year, 82 this year of our students going there. And then you'll see we actually saw a decrease in 10 students homeschooling. So 180 last year to 170 this school year. We're not quite back to that pre-pandemic of around 150, but still that was less students choosing to homeschool this year than last year. And then you also see, we did see a fairly substantial decrease in the number of students who are choosing charter schools. So 287 students choosing charter schools last year, 261 this year. So the enrollment options report is important for people to see, to understanding the in and out and where students are choosing to come to Northfield from and where Northfield students are choosing to go if they do not choose their home district. So that is the enrollment options report for this year. And I thank Chris and Val for doing the hard work to put this together.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from the board members? Okay, Amy.
So I have several questions. With our Portage students, do we have a sense of how many of those students are within the district and from how many are outside the district?
We do. I don't have it with you tonight.
Okay, fair enough. Then I've noticed there was someone doing the Minnesota Online High School. Can we like snatch them away and put them in Portage? Just
Yeah, so
Oh.
that's that is a great question, Amy, in terms of just the online environment is settling out. I mean, we're starting to, the Minnesota Online Virtual School is one of the first. I mean, that school has been around for a long time, for easily more than a decade and probably fairly close to 2 decades. So there are some folks for various reasons. It could be something specific to the programming of the online high school. That is an online charter school, so people have the opportunity to choose that like they could choose any other public school system in the state. It could be that that family had been choosing that prior to the pandemic. So while I understand where you're coming from, this is part of the challenge. It's one of the few areas where we do have this mix, right, of traditional public schools running their own programs that people can choose, and those kinds of programs in which have been longstanding that people also have been choosing.
And then my third question is about the homeschools kids. Do we do any sort of reaching out to them to tell them about Portage and see if Portage might be a good alternative where they could still be at home, but we would provide the curriculum?
You know, I think it's fair to say that we probably have some students in Portage right now who would have been homeschooled before. I don't think it's a ton of students. I would invite you to consider the historical nature of our home. We have long had a very strong homeschooling population. And so I think that I think there's probably as many reasons for people choosing homeschool as there are families, right? It probably fits into a few buckets. I think that our Portage program is well known amongst homeschool families. I think that they are choosing something different for individualized reasons. But we have, in fact, we have done marketing where we, not this year, but the previous year, we specifically sent postcards to every single family homeschooling to have them consider Portage. So we did capture some people in that way, and others, you know, have continued to homeschool. So it is a part that is a right that people have. It's very clear that people know about our Portage option. I do think that there are people who are choosing homeschooling for very individualized family reasons.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Okay, and so now we have the enrollment report, November 2022.
Yes, and we have the enrollment report for, so you'll see at the bottom, looking at that November 1st date. And essentially, you're gonna see that we're slightly up a little bit in terms of the total number in the grand total. And if you take a look at, I think the important part is to take a look at that final line, that full-time only excluding early childhood and part-time independent study. You'll see we were down slightly from last month. I think one of the big things you're starting to see, you're going to notice that the ALC has started to have some differences. And that has to do, the bulk of that has to do with independent study students who are at the ALC gaining additional credits. So that is, you'll see that there's a substantial difference there in 1 month. It coincides with the end of the first quarter. It is not an unusual circumstance.
Julie, do you have a question?
So if I'm looking at it correctly, the October 1st enrollment report, we had 106 students in Portage. We are now down to 64. And we went from 30 K-5 down to 13. Middle school went from 24 to 14. The high school went from 52 to 37. So if I'm reading the 10-1, oh, I'm sorry, never mind. I have the wrong year.
You made me very nervous there,
I
Julie.
know, because I was looking at it thinking, what the heck? So I just looked at it. So I apologize because that would really actually make no sense now, would it? So we have seen, however, where this year we have very nice Portage numbers compared to 2021.
Thank
So
you.
I apologize. I had the wrong.
No worries if
October 1 of
that's,
2021.
I'm just
so
happy my Apple Watch didn't detect a cardiac arrest there because
I apologize.
no worries.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, thank you, Dr. Helen. Finally, we have American Education Week is November 13th through the 19th. American Education Week presents everyone with an opportunity to celebrate public education and honor individuals who are making a difference in ensuring that every student receives a quality education. You want to make any comments?
I think that says it all.
Okay, our future meetings are Monday, November 28th and December 12th. These are regular board meetings at 6 p.m. here in the district boardroom. And then on Monday, January 9th, 2023, 6 p.m. is our organizational board meeting, followed immediately by the regular board meeting also held here in the boardroom. That is all of our business tonight. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Moved by Jeff, second by Amy. All those in favor say aye.
I.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned.